Okay, Endpapers. A family story of books, war, escape, and home. Written by Alexander Wolff with 2 F's and published by Atlantic Monthly Press in 2021. Why did I choose this book? Well, I grew up reading Sports Illustrated, and I was always a big basketball fan, and I would read Alexander Wolff when I was a teenager, and I always loved his stuff. I don't think I even really knew it was him. I didn't read for authors at that time, but my father would always talk about, my father was a writer, a columnist for the New York Daily News, and he was of the sort of writing school of, Strunk and White and, William Zinsser of avoid useless words. And he would always praise Alexander Wolff as this great writer, which maybe I sensed, but I didn't know why at the time. And so, I was curious to know if I could continue to be enthralled by this guy's writing 30 years later. And he had written this book, which I heard was about his family. And so obviously it was something that, it was obviously the book that meant the most to him. Also, according to the blurbs, it had memoir in it. Well, we'll get to that. First of all, the guy has got an unbelievable family story. His grandfather was Kurt Wolff, who was a avant-garde publisher in Germany. I think he started his publishing house just before World War I, then he served in World War I and then continued it afterwards, but then it kind of fell apart in 1930. He published writers like Franz Kafka, Joseph Roth, and a whole bunch of other names. But then with the whole rise of Nazism, his publishing house was threatened. Also, he was half Jewish on his mother's side, which according to rabbinical law and also to Nazi ideology, he was Jewish. So there was that, but also the authors he published. So he ended up becoming an exile. He left Germany, lived in various places around Europe. His story is fascinating. The guy had dealings and correspondence with Thomas Mann, Hermann Hesse, T.S. Eliot, Hannah Arendt. Big names. The guy was in, I think, a chamber music group with the great artist Paul Klee. Obviously, a real European aesthete. He ended up marrying, his first marriage was to a woman whose family ran the Merck pharmaceutical empire, which had ties to Nazism. All this is in the book. It's amazing how, this story of Alexander Wolff's family story, how it dovetails and interweaves with this really dark period in German history. Anyway, Kurt Wolff ends up coming to America in, I think, 1941 and founding Pantheon Books, which reinventing himself as a 54-year-old, where he published people like Boris Pasternak, Dr. Zhivago, The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco. I think he published also books by Günter Grass, the German Nobel laureate. At the same time, there's a story of his father, of the author's father, who actually fought in the armed services of the Third Reich and participated in the Ukrainian campaign, a kind of shameful campaign where the Nazis starved the Ukrainian population so that their troops could eat well, and there's all these scenes of his father, eating well. Alexander Wolff has this treasure trove of letters that his grandfather wrote, who was a tremendously beautiful and profound writer, letters of his father to his mother. It is really a miracle of, I would say, collecting research and then culling that research down to tell this just fascinating family story. Cinematographic in many ways, the family story. ties to power. And while he's telling the story, I mean, Alexander Wolff goes in 2017, takes a buyout from Sports Illustrated after working there for 36 years, to go to Germany with his wife and 2 kids, to live there for a year, to experience the place. He chooses Germany because he's heard that that's where German history has left most of its scars. I think the line he uses is something like, so here I had come to run my finger over those scars, to feel the length of the cuts, or to measure the length of the cuts and to feel the thickness of the tissue. I mean, this guy also is an aesthete as far as writing sentences. So he's there, and he is, Alexander Wolff, for a year he's there visiting different places in Germany. These places kind of stir up thoughts. He self-reflects in a fascinating way about guilt and shame, original sin, inherited sin, collective guilt, collective responsibility, what all this means, how he's kind of benefited from these, in a way, the benefits of these horrible crimes have passed down to make his life more privileged and easy. He faces all that, he faces it down. I learned a tremendous amount, and the idea of Germany facing up to its sins as a country, the culture of remembrance, and constantly reminding itself of the horrors that were committed there, how that cultural remembrance could be applied to the American system is a lesson I think all of us should learn, without a doubt. I would say maybe that the book peters out at the end. There are a lot of stories or family stories of what seems to me to be only tangential importance. I would say that I was slightly disappointed on the memoir front. You know, I would say memoir per se, there's kind of meager pickings. He goes to these different places around Berlin, and he, as he says, he kind of wrestles with revelations that he has while he's seeing these things, and he thinks very, very clearly on the page. I don't think he feels very comfortably on the page, although there is a point at the end of the book where, when he describes his father's death, which choked me up, but perhaps that was the only place where I kind of felt that he was writing from his guts. You know, if you think about it, memoir is kind of like a vulgar literary form. I mean, we write about ourselves. It's kind of gauche if you think about it. And you sometimes wonder if maybe Alexander Wolff thought it was in poor taste to sort of really get into depth with his own story. It's just something it occurred to me while I was reading the book. If I have a bone to pick with the book, I would say that, well, here's my bone to pick. The most prominently featured blurb on this book is by a guy named Beto O'Rourke. I agree with everything he said about the book, by the way. But it was strange to me that I didn't know who he was, and all the other blurbists had books next to their name, and I didn't know who this guy was, so I Googled him. Turns out he's a politician, sort of in the upper echelons of the Democratic Party. He was a Democratic senator, Democratic congressman, I think. Then he ran for senator against Ted Cruz, lost, but managed to get really good numbers for a Democrat in Texas. And now I think in 2022, he's thinking of running for governor. Okay, but why would you choose a politician in the upper echelons of the Democratic Party to blurb your book? I mean, politics, if anything, in the United States nowadays is just divisive, right? And if someone is in the upper echelons of the Democratic Party, or if someone is in the upper echelons of the Republican Party, you have to doubt their integrity. Because to get to the upper echelons of these parties, you have to kowtow to a very, very corrupt system. A very, very corrupt system. So here we're getting this endorsement of a guy who is basically part of a very corrupt system, and is probably going to put off a lot of people who sort of identify with the other corrupt system. Why even bring corrupt systems into it? It seems at best to be a very weird marketing decision. Why would you put off like half of the American population or half of the American voting population? Also, there's points in the book where he kind of, exposes himself at least as anti-Trump, mentions of sort of rightist populism. Okay, I would agree that the rightist populism is a problem. I would just say populism in general is a problem, rightist and leftist. Where the book has, I would say, political or societal relevance is in a section of the book where he quotes the writer Hannah Arendt in her book called The Origins of Totalitarianism, where he talks about how Arendt says that the ideal subjects for totalitarian rule are people who cannot distinguish between true and false, who cannot distinguish between fact and fiction. Then he quotes a German journalist, I think his name is Sebastian Hefner, and he says that the problem in Germany has always been emptiness and boredom, that the menace of monotony hangs. And he even quotes Albert Einstein as saying, like, Germany has always had kind of an inborn servility, their foolish faith in authority. Now, all of these comments by all these heavyweight intellectuals, right? All of these comments seem to have relevance in America today, right? It seems to me that there are two versions of fact and fiction in the United States. Very often, sort of like, the Republicans have one idea of fact and fiction, the Democrats have another idea of fact and fiction. Also, the idea of boredom and empty lives. I mean, everyone is on Twitter making noise. These people have jobs, I mean, they're bored and they're making noise, and then politicians are sort of like creating policy based on optics, which are based on noise made on Twitter. And then the whole idea is like people sort of, being like this inborn servility of people trusting in either what Trump says or what Fauci says, and just considering it gospel. I mean, it seems to me that you could draw the conclusion that in America right now, there is an environment that sort of lends itself toward totalitarian rule, but why put a party on it? It seems to me that there is kind of oversights on Alexander Wolff's part politically, and this is going to cause, I think, people to not read the book as closely and seriously as it should be read. That's the only bone I have to really pick with the book. Would I recommend this book? It is tremendously well written. Tremendously well written. Kudos to the author for crafting each sentence. Kudos to the author for, as I say, collecting and culling so much research. I mean, this was a family story that has universal relevance, without a doubt, that we all can learn from. But if you're going to it for memoir, you're probably going to be disappointed.